Karen, the head of the HOA, tossed a Vietnam veterans' medals into the trash like they were yard waste. She called them military junk and didn't blink when confronted by the veteran's son. But minutes later, a Pentagon car pulled up, with 2 officers and a Distinguished Service Cross. You won't believe how the neighborhood turned on her after what happened next, and how justice made its entrance right on cue. Nate had done everything he could to make the transition smooth. After his father's second stroke, he knew assisted living wasn't an option. Tom Garrison, once a fiercely independent Vietnam combat medic, had saved lives in the jungle and survived years of pain no one back home could truly understand. He deserved dignity, not a facility with buzzers and schedules. So Nate cleared the guest room, built a ramp by the front steps, and drove 12 hours to pick him up. They barely spoke on the way home, just old songs on the radio, a few stories about Mom. That silence meant everything. The last thing left was unpacking the few personal boxes that had followed them, and Nate had lined them carefully by the garage, under the eaves to avoid the sun. One was marked in bold Sharpie, "Service medals, do not touch." It wasn't just a box. Inside were 3 bronze stars, a purple heart with a deep scratch down the center, Tom's discharge papers from '72, and the perfectly folded flag that had draped his wife's casket, the woman who waited for him through 2 deployments. That Tuesday morning, Nate stepped outside with a mug of coffee and saw a landscaping truck he didn't recognize. 2 guys in matching polos were hauling items from his side of the garage. He walked faster. Then he saw her, Karen Delaney, HOA president, former real estate agent, and self-appointed defender of neighborhood aesthetics. She stood at the end of the driveway, arms crossed, barking directions like she owned the zip code. "This isn't a storage yard," she was saying. "All this clutter has to go. We gave him a week." Nate opened his mouth, but before he could say a word, one of the workers picked up the metal box, and dropped it into a plastic bin already filled with weeds and debris. The corner gave way. The contents spilled inside, something gold, something blue, and something folded in white stars and navy. Nate lunged forward, but Karen was faster. She walked over and gave the bin a firm kick toward a growing pile by the curb. "Military junk belongs in a museum," she muttered, brushing dust off her blouse. "Not in full view of the street. It's against code." Nate froze. For a second, the world went soundless. His fingers clenched around the coffee cup until it cracked. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Not words, not air. Behind him, the soft creak of a wheelchair cut the silence. Tom had made it halfway down the driveway, pale and thin, wearing a U.S. Army sweatshirt a size too big for him. His eyes were locked on the bin. "She just tossed my life," he whispered. It wasn't the first time Karen Delaney had gone too far. She'd been president of the HOA for 3 years, and in that time, she'd built a reputation as the kind of woman who noticed when a lawn was half an inch too high, or when someone's porch light was off-tone. Christmas lights in November? Citation. A neighbor's kid left a chalk hopscotch on the sidewalk. Warning. Someone left a bird feeder up past the season? Violation notice mailed and taped to the front door. But until now her offenses had been small, petty even, annoying but survivable. This was different. This was personal, sacred. Nate couldn't believe what he was seeing. He stared at Karen, waiting for her to realize what she'd done, to show even the smallest sign of regret. Nothing. "These aren't decorations," Nate said, voice low but steady, his jaw tight. "They're his medals. He nearly died for them." Karen barely glanced up. "Then he should have filed the proper HOA storage request," she replied flatly. "We're not running a flea market here. Rules apply to everyone." It was the way she said it that made something twist in Nate's gut. Not just dismissive, but almost smug, like she thought she'd won something. He stood frozen in place as the workers continued hauling broken branches and lawn bags around the metal box, now crushed beneath layers of debris. His father had pulled a man out of a burning helicopter while under sniper fire. He'd been decorated in front of a general. And now his medal sat under wet leaves and hedge clippings. And Karen? She had walked away without a second glance. The fallout began quietly, but spread like wildfire. That night, someone posted a photo of the broken metal box on the HOA Facebook group. The caption read, "Is this what we stand for now?" Within hours, the comments exploded. Some neighbors jumped to Karen's defense. "If we start making exceptions, where does it end?" one wrote. Another added, "Rules are rules. We can't let emotion override policy." But for every voice supporting her, 3 more pushed back. "You can't throw away a veteran's history." She didn't just cross a line, she stomped on it. Where's the humanity? The debate turned into a digital wildfire. People Nate hadn't spoken to in months were knocking on his door. Someone dropped off a small bouquet with a note. "Your father deserves better. So do you." But nothing prepared him for the phone call the next morning. It came from a number he didn't recognize. A calm, authoritative voice introduced himself as Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Benton from the Pentagon. He explained that a Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military award for valor, had finally been approved for Tom Garrison after decades of review. The military had combed through decades-old records, eyewitness reports, and declassified files. His actions during a covert evacuation in 1971 had saved 15 lives. And now, justice was catching up. An official military courier had been dispatched that morning. A formal presentation had been scheduled. There would be uniforms, a ceremony, photos, a moment. But now everything that mattered was buried under a mound of neighborhood trash, the medals, the folded flag, the carefully preserved documents. Gone. Or so it seemed. Nate stood there in the kitchen, the phone still in his hand, staring out the window at the trash bins lined up by the curb like they were mocking him. His breath caught in his throat. What was supposed to be a moment of long overdue honor had turned into an insult. Not from the military, not from time, but from a neighbor with a clipboard who thought she was keeping the neighborhood clean. That wasn't just trash in the bin. It was a man's history, a family's legacy, a country's promise. And Nate knew then, this wasn't over, not by a long shot. By the time Nate stepped out back with a pair of gloves and a black trash bag, the sky had gone flat and gray, quiet, but somehow charged. He didn't say a word to his dad, who sat silently by the living room window, eyes fixed on the street, one hand resting on his wheelchair arm, like he was trying not to shake. Nate didn't want his father to see what he was about to do. He knelt by the bins, heart hammering like it wanted out of his chest. The HOA garbage pile was spread across 3 cans, mostly lawn debris and clippings, but he could already smell something sharp, like chemical fertilizer and old water. He pulled back the lid and stared. There it was, near the bottom, barely visible under a pile of soaked hedge trimmings. The box, crushed, torn. One flap split wide open, cardboard warped and slumped in on itself. The Bronze Star ribbons were tangled around the corner of a broken plastic rake. The Purple Heart had slipped out entirely, half buried under damp mulch and dirt. Nate didn't speak. He couldn't. His hands moved on their own. One by one, he lifted out each piece, brushing off mulch, shaking off bits of debris. He laid the medals gently on a clean towel, unwrapping a small microfiber cloth he'd grabbed from the garage. The Purple Heart was scratched, but intact. He wiped it in slow, careful strokes, like it was glass. His throat tight-teened as he picked up the folded flag. It was wet, smelled of mildew, but still held its perfect triangle shape. The corners hadn't unraveled. He clenched his jaw so hard it hurt. Across the street, Karen's voice cut through the air like static. "Nope, that's a non-regulation basketball hoop," she was saying loudly, pointing her clipboard toward the Thompson kids' driveway. "I warned them last week. It's a safety hazard." She didn't even glance toward Nate, just kept walking, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other, like she was coordinating a military op of her own. He couldn't believe it. Not just the arrogance, but the calm in her voice, like she hadn't just disrespected someone's entire life. He stood there, sleeves stained from the trash, medals lined up like broken teeth on the towel beside him. His fingers were shaking, but his spine had never been straighter. And then, the moment no one expected. A sleek black government vehicle turned the corner and slowed to a stop in front of the house. The street stilled, engines hushed, conversations died. A breeze moved through the oaks lining the sidewalk, rattling a few dry leaves loose. One of them tumbled gently to the pavement, landing right by Nate's shoe. The car door opened. 2 men stepped out, both in full military dress, dark navy coats, polished shoes, gold trim, and badges that glinted even under the overcast sky. The taller of the two scanned the block, then looked directly at Nate, who still stood beside the towel, holding the box like it might fall apart in his hands. The officer's voice was calm, steady, but somehow carried across the entire cul-de-sac. "Is this the residence of Staff Sergeant Thomas Garrison?" Time stopped. No one moved, not even Karen, who had frozen mid-lecture near the Thompsons' mailbox. Nate took a breath. His chest still burned with anger, but something else stirred beneath it now. Something colder, sharper. Like Justice had finally remembered their address. He nodded once, just enough to say yes, and the ceremony, though unspoken, had already begun. Karen noticed the black government vehicle half a minute too late. By the time she realized who the 2 men in dress uniform were, they had already stepped onto the Garrison driveway. One stood at attention, the other holding a velvet case with gold trim, but instead of stopping, Karen came marching down the sidewalk like a storm in pearls, clipboard in hand, authority in her step. "Excuse me," she said, eyes narrowing. "This is private HOA property. If you're not residents, I'm going to have to ask you—" The taller officer turned, posture calm but firm. He held up one white-gloved hand. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "we're here on official military business. Please stand aside." It wasn't loud, but it carried. Karen froze mid-step. For a heartbeat, she looked as if she might argue. Then her gaze fell on the metal case. Then on the veteran in the wheelchair. Then on Nate, standing tall beside his father, holding the salvaged metal box like a sacred art artifact. She took a step back. Then another. Her mouth opened, then closed. The clipboard slipped to her side. The officers approached Tom Garrison slowly. One of them knelt, gently setting the case on his lap, while the other stood at attention. "Staff Sergeant Thomas Garrison," he said, "on behalf of a grateful nation and in recognition of your extraordinary heroism under fire, it is my honor to present you with the Distinguished Service Cross." The quiet was overwhelming. Tom blinked at the metal, then at the officer, then back to the metal again. His hands trembled as they brushed the ribbon. "I thought they'd forgotten," he said softly, voice roughened by time and disbelief. "They never forget, sir," the officer replied, eyes steady. "Not men like you." The front doors began to open all down the street. Neighbors stepped outside. Some had watched from behind curtains. Now they came forward, slowly, respectfully. A woman placed her hand over her heart. Someone else whispered, "My granddad served too." And then, just past the edge of the cul-de-sac, a white van pulled up. The local news station. A neighbor, probably Mr. Ellison, the retired school principal, had called them after hearing Nate's side of the story. The cameraman stepped out, caught sight of the officers, the medals, the moment, and started filming. It was all captured. The flag, the velvet box, the medals Nate had rescued from the trash, now cleaned and gleaming on a folded towel beside the old wheelchair. And Karen Delaney, standing a dozen feet away, pale, rigid, arms crossed over her clipboard like a child who'd been sent to the corner. The story aired that night on the 6 o'clock news. Local HOA president under fire after discarding Vietnam veterans' medals. Pentagon steps in with ceremony of honor. The footage spread quickly. A clip of Tom whispering, "I thought they'd forgotten," made its way to a national veterans advocacy group. By the next day, their social media post had over 200,000 shares, and the HOA inbox flooded. More than 300 official complaints poured in over 48 hours. Neighbors, veterans, community leaders, and even strangers from out of state demanding accountability. The board met behind closed doors. The next morning, an email went out to residents. Effective immediately, Karen Delaney has stepped down from her position as HOA president due to personal matters. A week later, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't knock on any doors. By month's end, her house sat empty, freshly power-washed, silent. As for Tom, Nate built a small custom case for the living room wall. The 3 bronze stars, the Purple Heart, the Distinguished Service Cross, the folded flag preserved under UV-safe glass. Above it, in small brass lettering, for duty, honor, and home. When people came by the house, new neighbors, old friends, even passing joggers, Nate didn't need to say a word. The wall said it for him. And for the first time in a long time, the neighborhood didn't just look quiet. It felt like respect had come home.